Hello and welcome to another Focus Learning interview. Today we are joined by Miriam Teuma of the Maltese Youth Agency. Big welcome to you, Miriam, and thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking a little bit about youth work, learning in youth work in general, and especially learning in youth work from a Maltese perspective.
So I'm Miriam Nik. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Youth Agency for Malta, which is in reality different from the Erasmus Plus National Youth Agency. It's the agency which monitors youth services and also offer youth services and youth work opportunities to young people where we think there are the gaps in reality. I've been doing this for the past 10 years. And because the agency has been set up 10 years ago, so I've been working and setting up this agency to try and, as I was saying, part of the work is really promoting youth work, setting youth work standards, and also creating youth work opportunities for young people. I also work at, I'm very quite active at an European level as well. I'm presently the chair of the Joint Council of Youth of the Council of Europe, and also the chair of the Steering Committee for Youth, the Council of Europe. So as you can see, it's quite a hectic but very interesting life I have.
And what has been your connection to youth work? How did you get into the youth sector?
How did I get in? Well, I was always a volunteer since I was young. I started off my profession as a teacher, and as part of, as in a way, hobby, if you want to call it, or commitment to wanting to volunteer and give more. I have always involved myself in youth organizations, and I was part of a youth organization for a number of years as a volunteer and as a youth leader. Throughout this, I also took up, it was the university then started giving formal training to youth leaders in reality. And a degree in youth and community studies, and throughout my volunteering life in youth and community studies to try and get more educated on how to do youth work. Mm-hmm. And then sort of after that, in reality, I completely had changed my career. I stopped being a teacher. I ended up lecturing at the University of Malta and educating youth workers while still being a youth worker as a volunteer. I've worked, then we set up the Maltese Association of Youth Workers to lobby the government to get youth work recognized in Malta and get youth work as a profession. And then also as part of the recommendation after the Council of Europe Youth Policy Review, where they had recommended the government to set up a national youth agency for implementing youth policy and, as I was saying, sort of creating statutory youth work. Then I became the chief executive of this agency. So it's been a long story. And I can say that since I was young, I was involved in youth work activities.
And you've hinted quite a lot in what you were just saying, but youth work is quite well established now in Malta, I think.
Mm-hmm. Youth work has always been here in Malta. Mainly it was part of faith-based groups. Most of the work activities were done through the Catholic Church. I was also involved in a youth organization, which was a Catholic organization. So, and besides that, there was the Girl Guides, the Scouts, but those were in a way the two, and they are still considered as Catholic in a way as well, and try to promote Catholic values and so on. So in reality, this is the story of how youth work has started here. But I can say that I was one of the pioneers really to try out and to lobby with the government to have more of a statutory youth work service rather than just the faith-based work, you know. And as I was saying, I mean, we started off. I was part of the organization at the time at that time where the first national youth policy was set up. That was way back in 1993, and through that first policy, an established course at the university for youth workers was set up, which I then had taken up myself. And after that, the students themselves, and although I was not really a student, I was already working and so on, but the students themselves set up a youth work association to lobby with the government to start off statutory youth work and to professionalize the youth work in a way. And that's when in reality, I can't say that youth work was established then, but that's when in reality there was dedicated funding for youth work, dedicated funding for the national agency, which I'm leading, and where youth work became part of the agenda and became part of the national youth policy as well.
And you mentioned in terms of the Catholic Church being one of the original bases where youth work was taking place, and you mentioned about how the values were often put across through that. Do you find that is something that is happening still today, not necessarily from the Catholic perspective, but positive values are a key part of youth work in Malta?
Yes, I think that's still the tradition. Of course, some of the values, although I can't, some of the values might have changed, or the poles have changed. The Catholic values are, in a way, also the European values, because when it comes to solidarity, when it comes, to respect, so those remain. They're still strong. Of course, now we have new values which work on, like the value of sustainability, like the value of being green, if you want to call those values too. But yes, youth work is still about that, the value of participation. What perhaps, the way we look at participation might have been different now than it was you looked at like 50 years ago. Why? There's more, the participation is more democratic. The young people, I think one thing which has changed is that young people have more of a voice now than they used to. And that's a value which we really work on when youth work activities are being held.
Yeah. So a lot of strong values without necessarily having the Catholic label attached to them anymore, but there's still some carried across. Yeah.
Yes, no, I don't think they have the Catholic value on anymore. That label is not there anymore. But in reality, the values are some of them are the same.
Yeah. And we're talking about, one of the things about focused learning, or the main thing about focused learning, the publication and the website, is all about learning in youth work. How does this look in Malta, in the youth work going on in Malta? Just linking also now with what we've been talking about with regards to values. There's an element of learning happening with the young people. How do you see this happening?
In various ways, some of I see it happening. Some of it is more formal than another. So there are some contexts where, you can see it very clearly. And why? Because either within the youth groups context or within that particular youth organization, or whether it's the context within a school, because we have some youth work in the school. That is I see that as more formal than others. Why?
Yeah.
Because a lot of youth work is really focused on directly learning like some kind of life skills. It might be communication. It might be, it might be how to be assertive. It might be decision making, and some of the work that youth workers do, especially in schools and so on, have a very particular objective on what they want to reach. So that's why I'm saying it's a little bit more formal than what some people might think. And we always talk about life skills, general life skills, but some of them are more on particular life skills. And then there are other contexts where youth work is less formal, very informal. And those are the contexts when youth workers are on the street in detached work, and also if they are within programs like learning, young people have to come to the place on their own for the youth work activity, and this is a group of vulnerable young people with disability. Some of them have got disability or vulnerable, and therefore they have, through that activity, they have learned how to get the bus, for example, on their own, So, but that's not part of the it wasn't part of the objective, or it's not the mission of the youth organization. But young people learned how to get the bus, or young people learned to do things through the activities that they are taking part of. And if it wasn't really those youth work activities, maybe some of them would have never learned them, but have learned them later.
Yeah, and I think that's, for me at least, also with the youth work background, is one of the main things, was drawing out that learning, even when it wasn't part of the agenda of the youth work itself. But that, like you said, the example you gave of a young person having to get a bus and learning how to where to get on, where to get off, paying for the ticket, all those things that we take for granted in everyday life. But if it's the first time you're doing it,
exactly, and some of the young people do learn these things because they have started going out to that youth club first, and they're gaining their independence. Their first independent activity is going to a youth club, and therefore those things, and that's why I said if they didn't go to a youth club, they might learn them later when the young people are allowed to go out on their own.
Yeah.
So imagine like 13, 14-year-old young people who have decided to go to the Scouts or to a youth organization, and it's the first time that the parents are allowing them to go on their own. So that's because of that. They learn how to get the bus. If they don't go to the Scouts, probably they will allow them to go out on their own when they're 16. So through that youth work activity, they have gained skills before other young people who are not yet allowed to go out. I'm not saying that parents over here don't allow young people to go out. I'm just giving an example. No. Or that young people don't go out alone when they're 13. But I'm just getting an example.
I understood it as a broad example, and I think one of the roles, therefore, of the youth worker is then to draw out that learning, even when it's informal, even when it's not part of the program. It's bringing the young people to a point of realization. I've actually learned something.
Yes, and sometimes we have youth workers who celebrate this, and even when you're talking to them, these young people have learned how to, or even when they're doing detached work out on the streets. They're interacting with young people, and then someone just says, I don't have a job, and because on their tablet or on their mobile, they are showing them on how to get to Jobs Plus, which is the organization taking care of employment. And in a way, they would have learned on what to do, how to connect to Jobs Plus if they want to search for a job. And therefore, sometimes you do hear young youth workers saying, you see, and now you've learned something new, how to search for a job, you know? So these are the skills that young people learn through youth work and through interacting with a youth worker.
And in the youth work in Malta, I mean, we're touching now a little bit on the informal learning that is happening.
Exactly.
From the perspective then of the non-formal learning, how does that look in youth work in Malta? What kind of I'm not sure what I want to ask you, but how does it look? What does it look like?
I hate, to be honest, in the last few years, before I used to make a lot of a distinction between the informal and the non-formal and the formal, you know, today I see it as learning, you know, so whatever youth work activity, whatever the youth work activity is, there's always some kind of learning going on. I explained sort of someone in the street, how can young people learn? Then going into a youth club, what they're learning, and the things that they're learning without knowing is getting to get the bus. But if then they are in a session on talking about solidarity or democracy and so on, they're learning other things which are slightly more formal, if we want to call them non-formal, or else if they're participating in an Erasmus Plus activity like a youth exchange and so on, they're learning on how to what's the word, how to interact with other young people from a different different nationality, coming from a different country, sort of learning the different ways and the different cultures. But at the same time, they might learn if they're a few Italian words, if their group is Italian, or a few German words if their group is Italian. They will also learn how to make a PowerPoint if they're going to present their own organization or their country to the others. So these are all different forms of learning, whether we want to call them informal and non-formal. Sometimes they might be more formal than non-formal, even though we don't like using the word formal. But they are formal as well. I mean, today I started looking almost as a youth exchange as a formal activity almost, you know, but because the fact that you have to set a program before, that you do the application and so on, of course, it should be with young people. But then once the program is set, then it becomes formal, because the idea is that you have to reach those objectives and you have to reach those outcomes, and you have to evaluate to see whether you have reached those. So, and therefore, lately I decided that why should we stay saying non-formal? Why shouldn't we just use learning rather than categorizing? It makes it easy for everyone. But anyways, just my thoughts.
I think sometimes the lines are very blurred in our descriptions of the three elements there, for sure. So where is youth work going in Malta? What's the future here?
Where is youth work going in Malta? That's an interesting question. What's the future? I see it. I mean, and if you look at our national youth policy, I think it's really trying to move on to professionalizing it more. I mean, we already have the Youth Work Profession Act, which recognizes youth work as a profession. But having an act does not mean that it's completely professionalized. You know, you have to practice that profession. So definitely, practicing the profession now is what's happening at the moment, sort of in a way more standardizing it and really acting like professional. And what does a profession mean? And how does that fit into youth work and into the informal and the non-formal ways that we usually describe youth work? So that's one thing, and that we're which is on the agenda at the moment. And the other thing which ties up with it is the quality of youth work now. Sort of, it's not just youth work, but what kind of quality are we talking about? I mean, what kind of youth work how is it of quality? And therefore the discussions at the moment is, what does quality mean? And how are we going to define quality? What is quality youth work and what is not quality youth work? So that these are the discussions at the moment on the agenda. I was thinking of something else, but suddenly I forgot it. But those are the two main aspects, really.
And is there a specific role regarding learning in youth work, or is this something which is just underplaying all the time, especially in terms of quality?
No, I mean, in reality, the discussion on qualities, to be honest, is really on whether and how much are the young people learning. That's one of the main things of quality. Are the young people really learning? How are we going to make sure that young people are learning? So how are we going to measure this? And now you triggered what I wanted to say. Sort of, should we certify this?
Yeah. Okay.
Should we give a certificate for this? Should we recognize this with a qualification, or should we, or shouldn't we?
Yeah.
And these are the questions. Of course, if we accredit this and not only validate this, but also accredit the work that we are doing, is this going to put us in a box?
Yeah, I think this is a big question.
That's a big question, and these are the questions, and we're asking them whether we should really go forward to accredit, or whether we should not accredit. What would be the pros and the cons? Would we gain more if we accredit? Would we bring more quality or not? These are and this is the vision, whether we should really take that route or not. Although the vision of youth policy is more at the moment, because youth work is very much embedded in the last national youth policy, which has been published in 2013 for the next 10 years, and youth work is very much embedded there. And the issue of quality is one of the actions as one of the actions under one of the strategic goals.
And this whole area that you're talking about now, this is a very current debate, I take it. And is there an end in sight towards this? Is there a point where you need to be making decisions?
I mean, definitely. And one of the policy actions is really to create a quality label for youth work. So some kind of decision would have to be made, There's also another quality quality measure on validating, on accrediting youth work activities. And therefore some decision has to be made over their own, what kind of activities should be accredited, how, and what kind of accreditation are we going to give to that. So yes, some kind of decisions will have to be taken.
I just wonder if we continue this series, maybe we get you back at the end of the year for an update on this.
We'll see. Perhaps a year might be too early, but we'll see. It might be that something might have happened till then.
No, it would be interesting to hear where this is going, because I suspect there are other countries with similar stories around Europe, but I know there's also a lot of countries where this is not even a question yet, depending on the history of youth work, of course, in our different countries. But it will be really interesting to see where things are headed, especially with regards to learning in youth work, and the link here with quality particularly. I think we're going to have to finish this here
Yeah.
on this really interesting note.
Yes, I mean, one little thing
Mm.
that perhaps it's interesting to point out also is the question of supervision in youth work as well. I mean,
Right.
that's another thing at the moment we're debating, and that would be an interesting thing to see where we would have arrived by the end of the year.
Yeah. Cool. Miriam, thank you very, very much for your time. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, and much appreciated that you spent the time here with us today. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you too for inviting me.